Rising terrorism in West Africa, ECOWAS disintegration, Sahel instability, and the urgency for regional security reinforcement. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where truth meets courage and analysis meets Africa. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. Today, we take a deep dive into one of the most urgent threats facing our continent, the rising tide of terrorism across West Africa and the Sahel. As ECOWAS cracks and the Sahel spins out of control, the question remains, can Africa come together before it's too late? Stay with us. A region under siege. The surge in terrorist activities across West Africa and the Sahel has reached alarming levels, triggering renewed calls for regional cooperation and urgent military coordination. At the 2025 First Ordinary Session of the ECOWAS Parliament in Abuja, Nigerian MP Dr. Zainab Gimba attributed the recent spike in terrorism to the withdrawal of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Her claims come amidst a wave of deadly attacks, especially in Nigeria's northeastern region, and an escalation of jihadist influence throughout the Sahel. Gimba's motion titled Strengthening Regional Security Cooperation in response to the escalating threat of terrorism and violent extremism. In West Africa and the Sahel outlines a stark reality. Terrorism is not only evolving, but intensifying due to fragmentation among regional stakeholders. This analysis explores the implications of her address, offers comparative insights across Africa, and recommends forward-looking strategies to reverse this trend. Critical analysis, ECOWAS disunity, and the domino effect of terrorism. The withdrawals of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, now united under the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, have fractured the once cohesive ECOWAS security architecture. These states, under military juntas following a wave of coups since 2020, cited ECOWAS sanctions and perceived Western interference as reasons for their exit in January 2024. However, the consequence has been a security vacuum exploited by jihadist groups like ISIS in the Greater Sahara, ISGS, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, Boko Haram, and ISWAP, Islamic State's West Africa province. Dr. Gimba's motion emphasizes that these insurgents have transitioned from improvised explosive devices, IEDs, to drone warfare and chemical agents, signaling a dangerous shift toward hybrid terrorism, where local grievances merge with global terror strategies. In her emotional yet evidence-based speech, Gimba highlighted attacks across over 15 Nigerian communities in just 60 days, including Bunigari, Alagarno, and Baga, which resulted in the slaughter of more than 75 civilians, seizure of military weapons, and destruction of multiple battalions. Her testimony, corroborated by Governor Babagana Zulum's field visits, paints a chilling picture of governance breakdown and unchallenged terrorist expansion. Source: Premium Times Nigeria, May 28, 2025. ECOWAS Parliament Session Reports Africa-Wide Comparison, Security Fragmentation Beyond West Africa, East Africa, Somalia, and the EAC Model. The East African Community, EAC, offers a cautionary counterexample. Despite its economic integration, Somalia's admission into EAC in 2023 has not curtailed al-Shabaab's operations. This underscores that regional integration alone is insufficient without joint counterterrorism operations and coordinated intelligence sharing. Central Africa, Cameroon, and the Lake Chad Basin. The Multinational Joint Task Force, MNJTF, cited by Gimba, has been one of the few functional regional military responses. However, chronic underfunding, fragmented command, and limited engagement from Sahelian countries have diminished its impact, particularly in Cameroon, Niger, and Nigeria. North Africa, the Libya effect. The arms proliferation from post-Gaddafi Libya remains the root cause of weapons trafficking into the Sahel. Even stable North African states like Algeria and Egypt face spillover risks due to porous borders and ungoverned spaces. Southern Africa, regional cooperation in contrast. Southern Africa presents a more unified front, as seen in SADC's military deployment to Mozambique's Cabo Delgado to combat insurgents aligned with ISIS. The SADC mission in Mozambique, SAMIM, has slowed down the insurgency since 2021, demonstrating the effectiveness of regional military collaboration when properly funded and politically supported. Source: Global Terrorism Index 2024, SADC Peace and Security Reports. Root causes: fragile states and strategic retreats. Gimba's motion also unearths deeper problems. Uncontrolled arms flows from Libya and Sudan, state collapse and military rule in Sahel countries, weakening regional intelligence, sharing ethno-religious grievances, and poor governance that jihadist groups exploit for recruitment, economic desperation, making locals vulnerable to terrorist taxation and coercion. She referenced confirmed reports from arrested terrorists in Zamfara state who admitted that the political instability in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger allowed for unmonitored arms delivery and terrorist regrouping, turning these countries into launch pads for attacks across West Africa. Source: Nigeria Intelligence Digest, March 2025. Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, Forward-Looking Strategies, Rebuilding Trust, Security, and Integration. 1. Diplomatic reintegration of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. ECOWAS must redefine its diplomatic posture toward the AES bloc. Sanctions and isolation have backfired, pushing the juntas toward Russia's Wagner Group, Iranian arms networks, and alternative security alliances. A new mediation framework with AU backing could provide a platform for phased reintegration based on agreed reforms and benchmarks. 2. Scaling up the MNJTF. Gimba's demand for increased MNJTF funding is timely. A joint ECOWAS AU funding mechanism supported by the African Peace Fund and international donors, e.g. the EU and US, is necessary to professionalize operations, expand intelligence capacity, and integrate air and drone surveillance. 3. Regional counterterrorism, intelligence hub. Drawing lessons from Kenya's Anti-Terror Police Unit, ATPU, and Morocco's Central Bureau of Judicial Investigations, BCIJ, West Africa should establish a permanent intelligence fusion center, headquartered in Abuja or Niamey, pending normalization, to consolidate actionable intelligence. 4. Border control and anti-arms trafficking framework. The African Union's Silencing the Guns initiative must be revived with a Sahel-specific arm tracking framework backed by satellite surveillance and customs coordination. Weapon tracking technologies, already piloted by UNODC in the Central African region, should be deployed in the Sahel. 5. Civilian Military Stabilization Program. Long-term solutions must include community stabilization, youth reintegration, and de-radicalization programs. Learning from Rwanda's post-genocide community reintegration and Uganda's DDR models, ECOWAS can design a framework where civilian trust is rebuilt through livelihood programs, psychosocial support, and grassroots reconciliation efforts. The latest developments, terrorism's advance to coastal West Africa, reports in May 2025 reveal increased terrorist incursions in Benin, Togo, and northern Ghana, signaling that extremist networks are moving closer to the Atlantic coast, fulfilling Gimba's warning. Gulf of Guinea states, previously insulated, now face the real possibility of inland terror networks, forging alliances with maritime pirates, amplifying the threat spectrum. Meanwhile, France's military exit from the Sahel, coupled with the collapse of the Barkhane operation, has further emboldened insurgents. A new regional vacuum is forming, one that the African Standby Force, ASF, remains unprepared to fill. External actors in the Sahel, geopolitical chess, or genuine security support. The escalating instability in the Sahel has turned the region into a battleground for global influence, where major international actors compete for strategic and ideological dominance under the guise of counterterrorism assistance. Russia, from influence to entrenchment. The most prominent shift has been the increased presence of Russia through its security proxies, particularly the Wagner Group, now rebranded as the Africa Corps, under the Russian Ministry of Defense. Since the withdrawal of French forces from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, these juntas have openly embraced Russian trainers, arms, and paramilitary advisors. While the juntas argue this realignment offers dignity-based partnerships, analysts warn it creates security dependency without accountability, often undermining human rights and deepening authoritarianism. In Mali, for instance, Wagner-linked operations have been implicated in massacres such as the Moura killings, which the UN described as potential war crimes, UN OHCHR Report 2023. The presence of Russian forces also dampens regional cooperation with ECOWAS as member states distrust each other's military alignments. This has further fractured intelligence sharing, exactly at a time when regional cohesion is most needed. China. Security through infrastructure. China's role in the Sahel remains largely economic, focused on infrastructure financing and resource extraction. But Beijing has begun quietly increasing its security footprint. Chinese companies in Niger, Mali, and Guinea have faced attacks, prompting Belt and Road security protocols and private security arrangements. Although China has not yet engaged in direct military partnerships like Russia, its non-interference doctrine makes it a preferred partner for authoritarian regimes, indirectly reinforcing fragile governance structures that jihadists exploit. Turkey and Gulf states, a new layer of influence. Turkey has emerged as a rising player, particularly in Burkina Faso and Niger, offering military drones, training, and counterterrorism support. Ankara's engagement is often wrapped in religious diplomacy, combining soft power with strategic access to natural resources and markets. Similarly, Qatar and the UAE have extended counter-extremism funding and humanitarian assistance, though critics argue these efforts lack regional coordination and often operate bilaterally, bypassing ECOWAS frameworks. The West's retreat and the multilateral vacuum. The withdrawal of U.S. troops from Niger's drone base in Agadez in early 2025 marked a critical moment in the region's security outlook. France, already expelled from Mali and Burkina Faso, now maintains only minimal influence in Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal. The EU's Takuba task force, once envisioned as a pan-European counterterrorism coalition, has effectively disbanded. This strategic vacuum has left West African states increasingly exposed, leading to fragmented responses to a threat that transcends borders. ECOWAS, now undermined from within, lacks the military cohesion, political unity, and financial muscle to counter these overlapping crises without broader continental and international support. Reimagining ECOWAS security architecture in a divided region. The current security crisis demands not just reactive deployment, but institutional re-engineering. ECOWAS must transition from an ad hoc peace enforcement actor to a cohesive regional security union, with a standing force, early warning systems, and sovereign intelligence capabilities. 1. ECOWAS Security Compact with AU and UN. A tri-level security compact between ECOWAS, the African Union, and the United Nations could help pool resources and restore legitimacy. This would require a clear division of labor. ECOWAS provides local force presence. AU coordinates political and diplomatic solutions. UN mobilizes global support, funding, and legitimacy. Such a model draws inspiration from the G5 Sahel Joint Force, which initially showed promise but collapsed due to interstate rivalries, insufficient funds, and lack of air power. A reformed ECOWAS security compact must avoid these pitfalls by embedding joint command structures and performance-based financing. 2. Reintegration incentives for Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Rather than relying on punitive sanctions, ECOWAS could design a transitional reintegration protocol for the AES states. This may include security aid guarantees in exchange for democratic transition timelines, debt relief or infrastructure funding tied to counterterrorism benchmarks, observer status in ECOWAS security meetings as a soft landing for re engagement. By offering diplomatic off ramps to military juntas, ECOWAS can re anchor the region's strategic center of gravity and rebuild collective security from a shared interest in survival. 3. Civil military dialogue mechanism. In many Sahelian countries, the military is now the de facto government. ECOWAS must adjust its strategies to include structured dialogue channels with these actors, focusing on professionalism, civilian protection, and regional cooperation. Without such engagement, the bloc risks becoming irrelevant in its core mission of regional peace and security. Human security, the missing link in counterterrorism. Amid all the high-level discussions of troops, weapons, and alliances, what is often missing is a focus on human security, the day-to-day well-being of civilians who are not just victims, but potential agents of peace or instability. According to the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, more than 8.4 million people in the Sahel are internally displaced. Women and children in northeastern Nigeria, central Mali, and rural Burkina Faso now live under de facto terrorist governance, where non-payment of taxes results in executions, as MP Gimba testified. A counterterrorism strategy that ignores food security, education, trauma healing, and local reconciliation efforts is not only ineffective, but counterproductive. Terror groups thrive on governance vacuums, offering security, jobs, and justice in areas the state has abandoned. Community-based stabilization efforts, such as those piloted in northern Uganda, Rwanda, and post-war Sierra Leone, offer replicable models. ECOWAS and international partners must invest in peace dividends, not just kinetic responses. Climate change, resource conflicts, and the extremist recruitment pipeline. The escalation of terrorism in the Sahel and West Africa cannot be fully understood without considering the ecological and economic contexts in which extremist groups thrive. Climate change, resource scarcity, and youth unemployment are fueling what analysts now call eco-jihadism, the weaponization of desperation in regions devastated by both environmental degradation and weak governance. Climate change, a catalyst for violence. The Sahel is one of the regions most severely affected by climate change. Lake Chad, once a lifeline for more than 30 million people across Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon, has shrunk by over 90% since the 1960s due to erratic rainfall, overuse, and rising temperatures. The decline in agricultural productivity and access to water has forced communities into competition over land, creating fertile ground for ethnic violence and jihadist recruitment. Terrorist groups have exploited this situation by positioning themselves as providers of protection and livelihood, particularly to disenfranchised pastoralist and farming communities. In areas where the state is absent or corrupt, groups like Boko Haram, ISWAP, and JNIM, Jama'at Nasr al-Islam wal Muslimin, step in as shadow governments, offering a brutal form of order amid chaos. Source: UNDP Sahel Climate Report, 2024, African Development Bank, AFDB, Climate Briefs, Resource Conflicts, and Armed Banditry. In Zamfara State, Nigeria, Tillaberi, Niger, and Gao, Mali, the convergence of gold mining, cattle grazing, and weak regulation has produced a dangerous mix of resource-fueled militancy. Armed bandits, sometimes allied with jihadists, impose taxes on local miners and farmers, mimicking state authority. These taxes often fund further arms purchases and pay insurgent salaries, reinforcing the cycle of violence. Dr. Gimba's revelation about Boko Haram executing farmers for failing to pay these illegal levies underscores a disturbing trend. Terrorists are not just destroying communities, they are governing them, taxing them, and enforcing their own legal codes. In these contexts, addressing terrorism without tackling natural resource governance is like treating a symptom without confronting the disease. ECOWAS and AU frameworks must now prioritize environmental peace building, including shared water governance frameworks among Sahelian states, climate adaptive agricultural support for at risk communities, conflict sensitive mining regulation, especially around gold and cobalt extraction. Source: African Union Panel on Resource Governance, 2023. Institute for Security Studies, ISS. Conflict and Environment. Brief Youth Unemployment and Radicalization. The Economic Trap. West Africa and the Sahel have some of the world's youngest populations, with over 60% of the population under the age of 25. Unfortunately, they also experience some of the highest youth unemployment rates, with limited vocational training, disconnected education systems, and few economic opportunities in rural areas. Extremist groups capitalize on this void, offering financial incentives, a sense of identity, and a structured lifestyle to idle youth. Recruitment is no longer ideologically driven alone. Economics is now the primary motivator. Former fighters interviewed in northeastern Nigeria and central Mali revealed they joined armed groups for salaries ranging from $50–300 a month, significantly higher than what most could earn in legal informal markets. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, often touted as a Pan-African economic savior, has yet to make meaningful inroads into these rural conflict zones. The benefits of trade liberalization remain confined to urban hubs and large economies. However, if reoriented with a conflict-sensitive lens, AFCFTA could become a powerful tool for peace and stability. Key recommendations include AFCFTA infrastructure projects in border communities prone to conflict, e.g. Mali, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Niger, Benin-Togo corridors, special economic zones, SEZs, in post-conflict areas tied to reintegration programs, youth entrepreneurship grants, and incubators targeting returnees from extremist groups. These economic stabilization mechanisms must be integrated into ECOWAS counterterrorism and post-conflict reconstruction strategy, moving beyond military responses to economic reengineering of vulnerable societies. Source: AFCFTA Secretariat Development Brief, 2025. UNDP Youth Radicalization Report, 2024. Women and Girls in the Eye of the Storm, Gendered Dimensions of Terrorism. As terrorism expands across the Sahel and West Africa, its impact on women and girls has become both a humanitarian crisis and a security concern. From mass abductions like Chibok, 2014, to the ongoing sexual enslavement of girls in ISWAP-controlled territories, the gender-specific tactics of extremist groups highlight a grim reality. Women are targets, tools, and potential agents of peace. Dr. Gimba's voice is particularly significant in this regard, not only as a legislator, but also as a woman from Borno State, the epicenter of Nigeria's insurgency. Her testimony reflects what field research confirms, that many abducted girls are forced into marriages, serve as suicide bombers, or are used as logistical couriers due to their lower risk of detection. However, there is a growing body of evidence showing that empowered women in local governance, civil society, and reintegration programs can disrupt extremist recruitment cycles and foster community resilience. For example, in regions of Chad and northern Nigeria, female-led NGOs have played a crucial role in negotiating safe returns, identifying radicalized youth, and monitoring early warning signs of recruitment. Policy frameworks going forward must recognize women as security actors, not just victims, provide psychosocial rehabilitation and legal support to survivors, integrate gender focused approaches in all ECOWAS and MNJTF strategies. Source: UN Women, Women, Peace and Security in the Sahel, 2024. Nigerian Center for Strategic Studies, Gender Analysis, 2025. ECOWAS in a post-unipolar world, redefining security and sovereignty. As the global order transitions from unipolar dominance to multipolar competition, West Africa stands at a crossroads. The withdrawal of traditional partners like France and the US, coupled with the entry of non-Western security players such as Russia, Turkey, and China, has redefined what regional security partnerships look like. ECOWAS, once viewed as Africa's most functional sub-regional bloc, now faces its biggest existential challenge since its creation in 1975. How can it preserve regional security, political stability, and economic integration in a world where power is increasingly transactional? Strategic autonomy or strategic dependence? A key debate emerging within ECOWAS member states is whether to pursue strategic autonomy, that is, self-reliance in military, intelligence, and economic terms, or to continue relying on external actors for arms, training, and funding. On one hand, the failures of Operation Barkhane, EU's Takuba force, and U.S. drone operations in Agadez have convinced many West African leaders that external interventions lack staying power and local legitimacy. On the other hand, financial and technological deficits in most ECOWAS states mean that foreign partnerships remain indispensable, at least in the short term. This dilemma is most apparent in Nigeria, which remains ECOWAS's economic and military backbone. While Nigeria's security budget for 2025 has increased significantly, N2.4 trillion or $1.6 billion USD, much of it still depends on foreign military hardware, including drones from Turkey, armored vehicles from China, and surveillance technology from Israel. Without a robust defense industrial policy and a regional arms pooling system, ECOWAS states may remain subcontractors of security in their own region. Source: Nigerian Budget Office, 2025. Defense Allocations, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. Arms Transfer Database. Regional sovereignty versus bloc discipline. The exit of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger has exposed the fragility of ECOWAS's governance model. The decision to suspend these states and impose sanctions, while in line with ECOWAS treaties, has provoked a popular backlash in the Sahel, where citizens view the bloc as elite-driven and externally influenced. As a result, there is an urgent need for ECOWAS to reform its decision-making structure to include grassroots civil society participation, improve transparency and democratic legitimacy, create space for context-sensitive governance solutions, e.g., transitional military-civilian arrangements with clear exit plans. Without internal reform, ECOWAS risks being replaced by alternative blocs such as the Liptako-Gourma Authority, now revitalized by the AES states, or the Community of Sahel-Saharan States, CENSAD, a dormant organization now being resuscitated with Libyan and Sudanese support. Source: ECOWAS Legal Framework Reports, 2024, International Crisis Group West Africa. Watch the role of digital propaganda and disinformation in modern terrorism. The battlefield has also moved online, where disinformation, digital propaganda, and cyber recruitment have become core tactics of extremist groups. Platforms such as Telegram, Facebook, WhatsApp, and TikTok are increasingly used to circulate violent extremist narratives, recruit disenfranchised youth, coordinate attacks in real time, undermine state legitimacy through fake news and conspiracies. According to the 2024 Global Cyber Extremism Report, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and Mali ranked among the top 10 African countries where terrorist content is created, shared, or consumed, often using local dialects to evade content moderation algorithms. Examples include ISWAP videos in Kanuri and Hausa calling for the overthrow of secular governments, fake ECOWAS communiques circulated during the 2024 sanctions crisis aimed at fueling anti-bloc sentiment, doctored videos claiming massacres by government troops to provoke ethnic reprisals, digital literacy, and counter-narratives. Countering this digital jihad requires more than censorship. It demands investment in local content creation, media literacy, and strategic communications that restore trust in democratic institutions and discredit extremist narratives. Civil society actors, religious leaders, and social media influencers, especially in urban hubs like Abuja, Accra, Bamako, and Niamey, must be equipped with tools to debunk viral falsehoods, promote inclusive, pluralistic identities, humanize victims and survivors of terrorism, share local success stories of resilience and recovery. ECOWAS, in collaboration with the African Union's African Center for the Study and Research on Terrorism, ACSRT, should prioritize a Sahelian digital resilience strategy by 2026. This would include cyber patrolling teams embedded within national police units, fact-checking hubs in conflict zones, educational tech platforms promoting tolerance, history, and civic responsibility. Source: Global Cyber Extremism Report 2024, AU-ACSRT Policy Recommendations. The road ahead, between resilience and rupture. As the 2025 ECOWAS parliamentary session continues in Abuja, MP Zainab Gimba's motion remains a clarion call for collective action. Her powerful testimony on the weaponization of poverty, geopolitical fragmentation, and the real-time collapse of communities is not simply a Nigerian concern. It is a West African emergency and, arguably, a continental alarm bell. The choices made in the next 12 months regarding troop deployments, diplomatic re-engagement with the AES bloc, and civilian protection will determine whether ECOWAS emerges renewed or irrelevant. Yet hope remains. The region is not without historical precedent for resilience. ECOWAS troops helped end Sierra Leone's civil war and restore peace in Liberia. African peace builders mediated the Gambia's political crisis in 2017. Youth-led innovation is flourishing in the tech, arts, and renewable energy sectors across Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria, and Côte d'Ivoire. The challenge now is to translate this latent potential into organized regional power, one that secures lives, protects democracy, and builds inclusive prosperity from the ground up. Grassroots peace building and local heroes, reclaiming hope from below. Amid the chaos of violent extremism and political fragmentation, a parallel story is emerging, one of resilience, community mobilization, and grassroots innovation. While ECOWAS debates high-level security strategies, thousands of local actors across the Sahel and West Africa are building peace from the bottom up, often with limited resources but boundless courage. Community vigilante networks and local security systems. In northeast Nigeria, Civilian Joint Task Forces, CJTF, originally informal vigilante groups, have evolved into semi-organized entities that work alongside formal security forces. In Niger's Diffa region, youth-led patrols monitor extremist movements and share intelligence with local authorities. Though controversial, these initiatives fill critical security gaps and offer real-time threat detection in areas beyond state reach. To avoid abuse and strengthen legitimacy, ECOWAS member states must develop a legal framework to register and train community watch groups, integrate them into national early warning systems, ensure oversight by civilian-led local councils. Source: International Alert Report on Community Resilience in the Lake Chad Basin, 2024. faith-based organizations and traditional institutions, religious leaders, both Muslim and Christian, continue to play an outsized role in social healing, conflict mediation, and counter-extremism messaging. In Mali, Sufi brotherhoods have successfully resisted jihadist recruitment in cities like Ségou and Sikasso. In northern Nigeria, imams trained in peace education and tolerance preaching have helped reduce radicalization in IDP camps and madrasas. Similarly, traditional leaders, from the Zarmakoy of Dosso in Niger to chiefdoms in Sierra Leone, are using indigenous conflict resolution practices to prevent violence, mediate land disputes, and rehabilitate former fighters. ECOWAS and the African Union must formalize partnerships with these non-state actors through faith and traditional leaders for peace networks, mediation and de-radicalization, training programs, funding mechanisms for grassroots peace initiatives, education reform, and civic identity. A long-term solution to violent extremism lies in education systems that foster critical thinking, civic engagement, and historical awareness. Countries like Ghana and Rwanda have already piloted curricula centered on peace, national unity, and African history. By contrast, in many Sahelian states, educational access remains limited, and school closures due to insecurity have left millions vulnerable to recruitment. According to UNESCO, over 10,000 schools were closed across the Sahel in 2024, affecting more than 4.5 million children. ECOWAS must adopt a regional education emergency strategy, including mobile schools and radio-based learning in conflict zones, cross-border teacher exchange programs, integration of peace building into formal curricula, investment in vocational training linked to regional value chains, diaspora engagement, and the untapped potential of African global citizens. The African diaspora, especially in North America, Europe, and the Gulf, remains an underutilized strategic asset in the fight against terrorism and political instability. Diaspora groups are already sending billions in remittances, investing in SMEs, and running education and health programs. But with better policy alignment, they could also support counter-narrative campaigns on social media, fund community peace-building programs, offer technological tools and training for local governments, advocate for global support in diplomatic forums. A formal ECOWAS diaspora security and peace-building framework could institutionalize this role through diaspora peace ambassadors, matching grants for diaspora-led projects, virtual knowledge exchanges between diaspora experts and local officials. Source: World Bank Remittances Data, 2024, African Union Diaspora Policy. Brief final reflections, advice to African leaders. As terrorism, state fragility, and geopolitical tensions threaten to undo decades of progress, African leaders, particularly in West Africa and the Sahel, must face hard truths and make bold, transformative decisions. 1. Stop weaponizing regional institutions. ECOWAS must move from punitive exclusion to inclusive dialogue. Sanctions and suspensions without pathways for reintegration have weakened the bloc and empowered adversaries. Dialogue, even with military regimes, is not appeasement, it is strategy. 2. Invest in people, not just guns. Counterterrorism is not sustainable if schools remain closed, hospitals are underfunded, and farmers are taxed by militants. African leaders must reallocate resources toward human development, not just military procurement. 3. Rebuild trust in the state. When people see the state only as a source of coercion and corruption, extremist groups find space to thrive. Transparency, rule of law, service delivery, and inclusive governance are more powerful than any drone strike. 4. Unite for a continental security architecture. ECOWAS should work closely with the African Union to develop a continental rapid response force, a shared intelligence hub, and continental cyber defense systems that transcend language, geography, and ideology. 5. Embrace the power of the youth and diaspora. Africa's future will be decided by its young people, its communities, and its citizens abroad. Leaders must shift from seeing these groups as threats or donors and instead recognize them as partners in peace and progress. Summary of key messages. Terrorism in West Africa is rising, exacerbated by the withdrawal of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from ECOWAS, which has fragmented regional security. External actors, including Russia, Turkey, and China, have filled the vacuum, but often with their own strategic motives, creating complex dependencies. Climate change, resource conflicts, and unemployment are root causes that feed extremism. Addressing them requires a shift from reactive militarism to proactive human security. Women, youth, religious leaders, and local communities are at the front line of both victimhood and resistance and must be central to any lasting solution. Digital extremism and disinformation are evolving threats requiring coordinated counter-narratives and digital literacy campaigns. The diaspora holds untapped potential for peace-building and counter-extremism efforts if properly mobilized. ECOWAS must transform into a people-centered, inclusive security union that blends sovereignty with solidarity. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV, where we inform, inspire, and ignite the path to a stronger Africa. If Africa must rise, it must rise together. The time for fragmented responses is over. ECOWAS must be rebuilt, communities must be protected, and leaders must lead with purpose. Don't forget to like, share, comment on your thoughts below, and subscribe for more critical analysis from the continent that can't be ignored. Until next time, stay bold, stay African.